The big problem at the heart of Across the Spider-Verse really comes down to a massive disagreement between two people who see the world in completely different ways. On one side, you have Miguel, who is convinced that certain things are just destined to happen. He calls these canon events. In his mind, these are specific moments of tragedy or loss that every Spider-Person has to go through to keep the entire universe from falling apart. He believes that even if you know someone is going to die or suffer, you have to just stand back and let it happen.
I'm sorry, Miles.
Send me home.
I can't do that. Not now.
What am I supposed to do? Just let him die?
To him, trying to save one person isn't worth risking the lives of everyone in existence. It's a very rigid way of looking at life, where you just follow a script because you're too afraid of what happens if you go off book. Then you have Miles, who represents the complete opposite view. He doesn't think it's right to just watch someone die if he has the power to stop it. He believes that being a hero means trying to save everyone, regardless of what some destiny says is supposed to happen.
So we're just supposed to let people die because some algorithm says that that's supposed to happen? You realize how messed up that sounds, right?
Miles thinks that we should be able to write our own stories and make our own choices instead of just letting life happen to us. He refuses to accept a world where you have to let your loved ones suffer just because that's the way it's always been done. This creates a huge tension because if Miles is right, then Miguel has been letting people die for no reason, but if Miguel is right, Miles might accidentally destroy everything. This conflict will be huge in the next film. We are stuck at a point where neither of them is willing to back down. They both think they are doing the right thing, and it's hard to see how they will ever find a middle ground or understand where the other is coming from. It's a total clash of philosophies. What makes it even more interesting is how hypocritical Miguel seems when you look at him closely. He keeps yelling at Miles and calling him an anomaly, basically saying Miles isn't a real Spider-Man.
You don't get it! You're an anomaly!
Not if you let me go home!
You're the original anomaly!
No! You're lying! I'm Spider-Man!
You're a mistake!
But if you look at Miguel, he's actually the one who is different from everyone else. He wasn't bitten by a radioactive spider in the normal way. He actually had to inject himself with a serum to get his powers. He doesn't even have a spider sense, which is the most iconic Spider-Man trait, and he can't even stick to walls naturally. He has to use talons and claws to climb things.
What are those claws? Dude, are you sure you're even Spider-Man?
It's pretty ironic that the guy who is the most different from the classic Spider-Man is the one acting like the gatekeeper and telling Miles he doesn't belong. By the end of the movie, the situation is really tense because Miguel and his group are actively hunting for Miles. Their whole goal is to find him and stop him from interfering with what they think needs to happen, which is Miles's father dying. Miguel is so set on this canon event thing that he's willing to lock Miles up or fight him just to make sure things play out the way he thinks they should. This sets up a really big problem for the next movie because we don't actually know what will happen when they finally run into each other again. It's hard to tell if they are just going to have a massive fight right away, or if Miguel is going to try to be more strategic about capturing him. The really messy part here is that the Spot is still out there, and he has become way more dangerous than he was at the start. He's basically a walking disaster now. It would be pretty short-sighted if Miguel spent all his time and energy chasing Miles around while the Spot is literally threatening to destroy everything. You would think the smart thing to do would be to focus on the giant villain, but Miguel is so obsessed with his rules and making sure the timeline stays correct that he might actually prioritize stopping Miles over stopping the Spot.
Would you just send everyone out? Anywhere he might be.
It wouldn't be a huge shock if he stayed that stubborn, even though it's a bad idea. Eventually, it feels like there has to be a moment where Miguel realizes he can't keep doing this. At some point, he's probably going to have to admit that stopping a guy who can destroy universes is more important than making sure one specific person dies. But getting to that realization is going to be difficult because there's so much bad blood now. It's not just Miles versus Miguel anymore either. By the end, Gwen has put together her own little group to help Miles, so now you have two different teams of spider people who don't agree with each other. It's obvious that the main threat is the Spot, and they can't really afford to be fighting among themselves while he's tearing things apart. However, even if they decide to work together to save the world, there is still going to be a lot of anger and tension. Gwen's team and Miguel's team have completely different ideas about what it means to be a hero, and you can't just forget that Miles was being hunted by people he thought were his friends. It's gonna be a really awkward and difficult situation to resolve because everyone is so divided on what the right thing to do actually is. When you think about where the story is going, it seems pretty hard to imagine a world where Miguel and Miles end up being best friends or hanging out together like nothing happened. There has been way too much fighting and way too many mean things said for them to just become buddies. However, it does feel like they might eventually reach a point where they at least understand why the other person did what they did. Even if they don't like each other, they might come to a place of mutual respect where they realize that both of them were just trying to do what they thought was best for everyone, even if their methods were totally different. As for how the whole canon argument will end, it really feels like the movies are leaning toward Miles being right. The whole message of the first movie was about how anyone can wear the mask and how you should be able to decide your own path. So, if the third movie ends by saying you have to let people die because a computer program says so, it would totally go against everything the story has built up so far. It makes more sense that the ending will show that you can actually save the multiverse by breaking the rules and making your own choices. The idea of writing your own story is a big theme, and it's much more likely that the plot will reward Miles for his courage rather than telling him he was wrong to try and save his dad. If that happens, Miguel is going to have to face a really tough reality. He would have to admit that he's been wrong this whole time and that he's let people suffer for a theory that wasn't even true. That's a huge thing to process, but if he wants to actually save the world from the spot, he's probably going to have to get over his pride and join forces with Miles. Seeing Miguel finally switch sides and help Miles would be a huge turning point for his character. It would mean he finally stopped being so afraid of the what-ifs and started focusing on the person standing right in front of him. Of course, all of this is just guessing and coming up with theories based on what we've seen so far. It's really interesting to talk about because there are still so many things that need to be resolved and so many loose ends to deal with, and we're just waiting to see how it all finally gets fixed.